It's all about family. Family? Well, that's at least what they said in the trailer. The first Shazam movie was a lot of fun for me, and I really enjoyed the way that Zachary Levi portrayed a teenage boy in an adult's body with incredible superpowers. Now Shazam is back, and he's pissed off some very powerful players. Is Shazam Fury of the Gods a worthy addition to the growing story? Bestowed with the powers of the gods, Billy Batson and his fellow foster family are still learning how to juggle teenage life with their adult superhero alter egos. When vengeful ancient gods arrive on Earth in search of the magic stolen from them long ago, Shazam and his allies get thrust into a battle for their superpowers, their lives, and the world's fate. As I said, Zachary Levi is back in the title role, and with him we also get Dylan Grazer, Rachel Zegler, Grace Caroline Currey, Helen Mirren, Lucy Liu, Djimon Hounsou, and Asher Angel, among others. Now basically, the majority of the cast from the first installment is here. Now something I was a bit surprised about is that Asher Angel, who plays Billy Batson, Shazam's teenage self, he's barely in this movie. Most of the time we see Levi, and he's still wonderful playing a teenage boy in an adult body. Now, some of the shtick did begin to get old as they play the same jokes over and over, especially as it relates to Billy or Shazam being insecure about others not being around him or not functioning as a group. And now this does make sense for a climactic moment later in the story, and it does have a massive emotional punch to it, but when the joke is Shazam is kind of naive or dumb, and it's played repeatedly, it just loses any comedic appeal. Now for me, Dylan Grazer, he stole the movie. He is consistently hilarious, and he features the right mix of awkward teenage clumsiness and extreme overconfidence. He's got excellent timing, and he made me laugh both with his words and his physical comedy. And his snark and the sarcasm, they could have become old or tired, but because it's interwoven with heartwarming and bumbling moments, there's a nice balance, and he maintains all of his charm throughout. The main theme and focus of family, I think it's really well executed because it's not just looked at from the perspective of Billy and his foster family, or just even the other foster kids in the house. We also get to see the family dynamics from the villains in the story, and even some portions from Djimon Hounsou's wizard. And I also like that they're not all the same approach to looking at family dynamics. The good and bad are examined, and each features at least a small portion of redemption. As we saw in the first film, the other foster kids in the family also got Shazam powers, so this story allows us to see more of them and how they interact. Now, some of these sequences, they feel a bit absurd and even rushed, but there are also some excellent action scenes that we get when the superpowers come out. There's a fight between Shazam and one of Atlas's daughters in the middle of the movie that was a lot of fun, exploiting the speed and the strength of the heroes, but with the complications of an equally powerful opponent and then a very confined space. The effects used in this, they look good, and the antics, they also provided some laughs. There are other action sets in the movie, and sometimes the graphics were just okay, and maybe even sometimes felt a little chintzy or lacking. There's also one where the whole scene was a little ridiculous and not as funny or as exciting as it was meant to be. That was kind of a bummer because it was the initial big opening action number, and to start off a little lackluster like that, it's just not a strong start. But even if the beginning was a bit wonky, the end was a ton of fun for me. It's a long action piece that is huge in scope and massive with the chaos and destruction. Plus, there are some high stakes that the characters are up against, and that threat of peril made it very engaging and exciting. Now, the arc is highly predictable, with most of the outcome being telegraphed way in advance, but for me, it still didn't take away from the emotional impact of the scene. I think it's because the story had done such a good job at establishing the family focus earlier. When all was said and done, though, for the story, it did feel a little pointless, like there weren't actually any consequences to what had happened. Now, some of that could be just because of how simple and straightforward the story was. It's linear without much complexity or surprises. And I know that's odd to say, especially because I really enjoyed the climax of the story and I was very engaged in it. Now, I mentioned some of the special effects earlier, and these are a mixed bag throughout the movie. Sometimes the effects looked outstanding, especially with one effect where matter is being manipulated, and it causes city buildings to completely rearrange themselves. It's fluid and it's mesmerizing. And it is a bit like what you might see with Doctor Strange in the MCU, but this feels cleaner and easier to focus on. But as cool as some of those effects are, there are also some creatures that we see later in the story that feel very video game-like. The design is cool, but the textures and the lighting, they just make them feel fake and not part of the world that we're experiencing. Just like in the first movie, there's a lot of comedy inserted here. Sometimes it's jokes, other times it's physical humor or even sarcastic remarks, but it's all very mixed. Some of them land effectively, creating genuine chuckles and laughs, but then there are others, and not just a few, that fall flat and feel very forced. Now, I mentioned how Grazer is very funny, but another that gets to deliver something very, very funny is Helen Mirren. There's a point when she has to read a message, and the content, it is just really well written, and it's very comedic, but it all depends on the delivery. Mirren kills it and gives the right inflections and pauses while she's reading so that the joke lands perfectly and makes the sequence really humorous. Now, it could have gone sideways very quickly, but she nails it, and the story also sets it up with some good context, making for a solid scene. You know, it's not new or unique to have product placement in movies or shows. Sometimes it's nuanced and subtle, and other times it's painfully obvious. There's one instance of product placement in this that sits squarely in the latter scenario. I mean, there is a bit involving Skittles, and it was actually painful at the obviousness. The whole part felt very forced, and I'm sure that we're going to be seeing it included in a commercial very soon, if it's not already airing. Actually, though, the usage of the Skittles, it's not the issue. I mean, it was the blatant use of their tagline that got me. It went from being something that was mildly organic to being outright obvious. So I think if you enjoyed the humor and the tone of the first Shazam movie, then you will enjoy this one because it doesn't stray too far from what had been set up before. The snark and the comedy mostly work, and the character dynamics build out a cohesive and cheer-worthy set of characters. While the story is uncomplicated and very straightforward, the focus on family that sits at the heart of the narrative is both engaging and impactful. The effects mostly look great, with just some minor missteps here and there. There's also a mid-credit scene as well as one at the very end. Now, the first one feels way more important than the last one, but I am curious at where they're both going to lead. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and a ton of violence. I give Shazam! Fury of the Gods 3.5 out of 5 couches. So, if you could have a superpower, what would you choose? I think either flight or extreme speed would be cool, but let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.